I often compare like direct to consumer retail and traditional retail. And I think that traditional retail's truths will become true in direct to consumer, just in different ways. And so traditional retailers have outlet stores. When you don't sell an item, when it's out of season, it goes to an outlet store. Damaged items also aren't just dead. They go to a Gabriel Brothers or some sort of like third party discount retailer. Discount retailers and outlet stores are not a thing presently or historically for direct to consumer brands. And there's also like consignment. And so I think you're going to see a new world of like resale and re-commerce.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Super excited to be here today with Jonathan Poma, who started Loop or Loop Returns, I guess probably more exactly. So Jonathan, let's start with the origin story for Loop, because it's an interesting segment of the market that you've chosen to tackle.
Yeah, Kevin. Kevin, thanks for having me. Excited to connect. And yeah, origin story. I feel like I could take up all our time just talking about that. And I think maybe from a principled perspective, what I'll say is like so many things had to go right with so many people to put the company together. And I'll give maybe a quick abbreviated picture of my background. So business major, went into lumber sales first, then software sales. Was always a digitally native fringe technologist, and found my way into to digital in 20 goodness, when would that have been? 2009. In 2010, I joined a digital agency and grew with them from about 10 people to 40 people, and from $3 million in services revenue plus. In that time, uncovered a lot of stuff. Went from we dabbled in e-commerce services support, and I found my way kind of loving e-commerce, and that was maybe the initial seed that planted. But loving e-commerce because delivering value was so clear. I didn't have to connect dots across 30 different things. It was like, we made this change on your website, or especially if we did a split test, we made this change to this set of visitors, and it had this impact. And it just was very clear. It was almost intoxicating. You could just see the real tangible nature of business impact on your clients. And so I left my consulting job and ran digital for an e-commerce brand called Homage in 2013. And in late 2013, I re-platformed Homage to Shopify. Shopify Plus at the time, it was like very, very early days of Shopify Plus. The way I tell the story, I think we were the fourth or fifth or sixth brand ever to launch on Shopify Plus. I think Shopify was a Series C company at the time, and I didn't know what Series C was or venture, and didn't really understand any of that, but just a little bit of time and place. And about a year later, I saw an opportunity to take my consulting background and my e-commerce background and start an e-commerce consultancy. So I finagled my way into being one of the original 6 Shopify Plus agencies. We were called Rocket Code. And in a really kind of serendipitous way, the team at Chubby Shorts was familiar with Homage, where I had been running digital strategy and e-commerce, and reached out to the guy I was working with at Shopify and asked them who did the work for Homage. Long story short, I sold a contract to Chubby's, and we started working together. And just to build a great relationship. And about a year into that relationship in 2015, still remember like exactly where I was in this small, probably 900 square foot office with drop ceilings, and got a call from Dave Wardell, who was the Chubby's VP Finance at the time, eventually CFO. And he was like, Jonathan, we've got a problem with returns. And so I listened. I was a consultant sort of in nature. So asked a bunch of questions, made sure I understood what he was talking about, hung up and grabbed one of our designers and one of our engineers. And I'll pause here. And like the premise of this part is that Loop was born out of product market fit, which is double-edged sword, but Loop never had to find product market fit, because I think the whole reason we built the company was because we had it, and we had to do something with it. But like very quickly, very serendipitously, like 15 minutes, pulled up the Shopify API docs on our laptop and sat at a whiteboard and kind of said like, hey, we can look up an order with an email address and a zip code, right? And like, we can see inventory levels in real time, and we can place an order and like, you know how those articles on LinkedIn, this was 2015, maybe early 16. Like at the time, LinkedIn had those articles where like they would put the article in a sessioned experience with a little LinkedIn bar at the top and a +1 or a like or something. And we were like, could we do like that sessionized experience like LinkedIn does on chubbies.com and let you shop the storefront and come back into to our software and place an exchange? And so we sort of like proof of concepted it. Our tech lead was like, yeah, that should work. So that was like, I mean, it was like 30 minutes. It was so serendipitous. About 2 weeks later, we had like design prototypes, mock-ups that we showed the Chubbies team. They were like, this is awesome. We should totally do this. And about 6 weeks later, we were live with what we called Chubbies RMA. It was Chubbies, return manufacturer's authorization is what it was. And it was the automation of, back in the day, you'd find a PDF on the website, you'd have to download it, email it in, or, whatever it was. And so we called it Chubbies RMA. And in 2015, that would, become what Loop was. Like I said about on the Shopify side of the story, I had no idea what venture was. I had never heard the term SaaS in my life. I was running an agency, and all I thought was like, man, if Chubbies need this, maybe some other merchants need it. Maybe we could sell it to them to win a project. And so, we had sort of a shared IP agreement with Chubbies, and we wanted to sell it. So I went out to San Francisco in early 2016 to talk to Kyle Hensey, who was the founder, and some of the other founders, and Dave about sort of the opportunity with the Chubbies RMA software. And Kyle, again, more serendipity. He had worked at a venture firm, and actually, I wouldn't know the story. What I was going to say is he almost had his term sheet selected for Shopify Series A, but they at least submitted a term sheet for Shopify Series A. So if you can imagine him as an analyst, he knew e-commerce as a market. He knew what Shopify was doing. He knew what was happening in the mid-market and all of this stuff back then. And he kind of looked at me and he was like, Jonathan, this isn't a project that you launch for more clients. This is a software company. We need to go raise money and scale this thing. So we took Rocket Code, which was my agency, and Chubby Shorts, and formed a joint venture, a new entity. Each of us owned 50% of the company, and we started building what would eventually become Loop. Right around that time, and I'll stop with the origin story here in a second, and you can navigate the conversation wherever you'd like. I quickly learned that running one business was hard enough, and that I wasn't good enough to run two businesses. So I was trying to run my agency and Loop, or the nameless software company that would become Loop. And I, again, more serendipity, ran into a buddy of mine who had just been laid off from Klarna. He was over in Sweden working on Home Try-On, and he pitched me his Home Try-On startup idea over lunch. And I was like, man, you can't do Home Try-On without returns. And I have this returns app, and I need a leader. And I needed to be a person I trust who's product oriented. And so I brought him in to be CEO. His name's Corbett. We're still great friends to this day. Hired him as CEO, took a couple of our engineers from Rocket Code, brought them in with a bunch of Kyle's help and introductions to Allbirds and Cotopaxi and stuff like that. Who are still customers today, raised our seed round, and I served on the board as the company was formed in 2017. And I'll get you back into me getting into the business. Sold Rocket Code to BVA, a brand value accelerator, in 2017. Sold BVA to a small private equity family office in 2018. Shortly thereafter, was graciously removed from the CEO role. My daughter had just been born. I was traveling across the country on the first flight out on Monday mornings, red eye home on Thursday nights. Not doing my best job. Probably deserved to have to be removed from the CEO role at the time. In December of 2018, and moved into what we called a chief evangelist role, a head of sales, and someone who knew the Shopify ecosystem, all that sort of stuff. And at a board meeting for Loop in February of 2019, we were about $500,000 in ARR. We were, running out of our seed capital. We needed to raise a round of funding. And I sort of shared with the board that I was no longer responsible for the BVA business, and the conversation sort of turned to like, how do we get you back into Loop? And so I sat down with Corbett and our executive coach, and we kind of figured out like who was going to be in what swim lane and how we were going to divide up roles and responsibilities. And by May of that year, I was back in the business. Raised a convertible note so that we could, go out and raise a Series A without the pressure of running out of cash. raised our Series A that fall, and we're off to the races.
Cool. Well, that's a story that includes a lot of serendipity. So thanks for sharing that. It's interesting because when I look at what Loop's doing, it seems like you're creating a branding experience out of returns, right? And that most retailers probably just think about returns as a cost center, not a way to delight their customers, right?
Totally.
And since every touch point for a brand is important, so how has that been in sort of when you go out and talk to brands about it and retailers about it? Is it really all about the sort of delighting of the customers, or is it really more about controlling costs and making things more efficient? Is it a financial pitch? Is it a marketing pitch? Is it both?
Yeah. It was a lot harder to sell on the vision and the opportunity back in 2017 when we were trying to raise that seed round. I would say by the time 2019 came around, the idea that retaining customers was important, the idea that solving a return and doing it well was an opportunity to sort of repair a broken promise. Because essentially what happens anytime there's a return is the customer bought the product with some set of expectations that weren't met, whether it was size or fit or damage or color. And I guess my caveat there is for good actors in the return process. That's sort of what happens. And so the merchant has an opportunity to mend that. And we certainly started with some very forward-leaning customer experience-focused brands. I think Chubby's, Allbirds, and Cotopaxi were of those brands. And if you look at like customer centricity and doing right by the customer, that's sort of, I think, a big part of what propelled those brands to success. So they were, I mentioned I was an early adopter. They were early adopters and sort of trendsetters. And then I think, 2019, 2020, especially as, e-commerce took off with the pandemic, post-purchase became a thing. Returns, if you go to Google Trends and you search reverse logistics, that term wasn't really widely used in 2016, 17, 18. And by 19 into 20 and 21, it was, a hot topic. And so, and it's actually been interesting in the evolution of maybe the macroeconomic conditions the last 12 months too. Prior to, June 2022, the whole story was customer retention. It was turning a refund into an exchange. It was customer lifetime value focused. It was shortening time to repurchase, all that. As interest rates have risen and merchants had too much inventory and consumer spending habits changed a little bit. Recently, that value prop has certainly taken a back seat to like, how is this going to save me money, and what can where is returns costing me money, and how can you help with that? So it's all of that is kind of brand experience and it's critical to a brand success. And so there's a sort of a shared destiny for a shopper and a merchant if the shopper loves the merchant's brand to make it work. But it's been both of those things, and I would say in the last 6-9 months it certainly has been more of like, help me optimize the costs of reverse logistics because it's eating into my margins and my net operating income and my EBITDA and all that.
Sure. So it's sort of, I guess, easy for me to visualize returns turning into exchanges in an apparel business, and that would include shoes in there as well. And obviously, with our Allbirds as a client, that's an obvious win. Are there other categories for which the sort of conversion from a return to an exchange is sort of a no-brainer, or is it really more apparel centric?
Yeah. I would say that the return to an exchange is heavily, apparel centric. You could get into like, these are all subsets of apparel, but footwear, swim, intimates, health and beauty is a bit of a category where you see that. Electronics as well. You start to get into kind of what we would call like returnless refunds or returnless exchanges too. We in our software, we call it a keep item flow because, as a cosmetics brand, you might want to let someone exchange the product, but once it's been opened, you can never use that product again. So you'll have them keep it and save the, $4 on a shipping label it would cost to send the product back. And, obviously, you can see us building some logic into the software to make sure that I don't uncover that as a shopper and then start realizing I can get a free exchange and keep
Sure.
2 items, or get a refund and keep the item, or whatever the case may be. But I guess what I would say is also happening, where maybe it's not as much exchanges, and this is, we've got to do a little bit of storytelling and back it up with data, and we are processing more than a million and a quarter returns every month right now, and our merchants are doing 20 billion plus in last 12 months GMV on Shopify. So we're seeing some of this at scale, but we have to tell the story with data that, for example, we're seeing home goods as an area where returns are becoming more relevant, and we're having to work with freight rather than just parcel pickup on the back end, and the exchange might be less obvious there. But when we can track that customer over time, what still is true, and this is, it challenges that cost center or cost recovery paradigm. But what we still see to be true at our scale is, if you do right by the customer in that return experience, they are more likely to come back and trust you and buy from you again. So it might, like, there are other categories where you may not have the same immediacy of exchange, but the return and delivering a great experience to the shopper is still very relevant, to make sure that brand, that merchant, is in the consideration set for future purchases.
That's interesting. The I would imagine there are some retailers on Shopify and elsewhere that have that are DTC, right, versus other ones that are selling other people's brands. Does that change the return dynamic much? Whether it's sort of their own product that's being returned versus somebody else's?
It certainly changes the unit economics and the considerations that are made, right? If you're selling someone else's product, you've likely bought that product at wholesale, and so your margin is half. So we certainly see that brands selling their own products in their own channels are more likely to be Loop merchants or Loop customers. There's a nuance. There are aggregators that we work with who have been successful. There's probably one more nuance, which is, and this is all sort of invisible to the customer, so it's like a problem the brand or the merchant, or in this case where you're selling other merchants' products, I would call that a retailer, if I were delineating between the two. But is whether you are fulfilling yourself or whether you're drop shipping. And that just introduces, again, complexity that the merchant has to deal with, costs that the merchant has to deal with, that at the end of the day, the shopper doesn't care about. The shopper bought the product from, aggregator X, and doesn't care that it's drop shipped from merchant Y, or that if they're returning 3 items, it might be drop shipped from merchant Y, merchant Z, and merchant A. And so, there is a challenge, and maybe a healthy tension between needing to meet customer expectations, and meeting those shoppers where they are, and driving some of the unit economic profitability to make sure that those brands and retailers that shoppers love buying from can afford to exist and continue to deliver that experience. And so, what you're certainly starting to see, I think of it as like a partnership between brands and shoppers. And I often say, like, we can all handle disappointments, we can't handle surprises. And like transparency and micro copy and all of that stuff is really useful. And what we're starting to see in this more challenging environment for brands and retailers alike is that shoppers are willing to pay a fee for a great return experience. There just is a quid pro quo that comes with that, and if you're going to charge a fee, the experience better be great, and all of that. So there's obviously a lot to it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, one thing that may have changed your roadmap a little bit, or I'd imagine maybe it has, maybe it hasn't, is sort of during the pandemic, there was this transformation where sort of Main Street went e-com, right? And Shopify obviously was a beneficiary of that, because they started to basically say to the Main Street retailers, hey, why don't you ship out? If you can't be open, or you have people unwilling to come into the stores,
Yep.
transform yourself into a multi-channel merchant, right? And so
Totally.
has that sort of really changed your product roadmap, in that Sometimes you have situations where the return could be, human facilitated, right? The person could
Totally.
buy on Shopify and then want to bring it back to the store, right? That'd be big retailers. That may be the case as well for multi-channel big retailers, but really more on the sort of M side of SMB, right? Where they're sort of mid-sized organizations, they may be taking full advantage of Shopify, and now they're dealing with the returns. Did that change your product roadmap?
Yeah, it certainly did. I would say, and I would say it changed some things in 2020 and 2021, and then it even has changed some things today as things have ebbed and flowed. And if I'm sure you and I have, and maybe some of your viewers and listeners have seen that chart where it talks about e-commerce penetration as a percentage of retail, and it, in the middle of 2020 it jumps up like this, and maybe someone exists out there, but I never saw one analyst prediction ever that actually got it right with what happened. Because what happened was the penetration climbed when there was no retail, and it's basically fallen back down to that trend line. And every analyst, the smartest people in the world, the most average people in the world, thought that line was going to stay up top forever. And so what I would say that changed on our roadmap was, we certainly invested. We have a partnership with Happy Returns, and what they do great, and what they do that we don't have any interest in getting into is the drop-off and consolidation experience, the drop-off experience for customers, and then the consolidation and reverse logistics experience for merchants. And we saw a dramatic shift in shopper preference when buying online to not have to print a return label, not have to put something in a box, not have to tape that box shut and go drop it off, but to be able to do what we call boxless, labelless drop off. And so we saw a massive shift there. That has changed. It changed our product roadmap in terms, and honestly, our commercial roadmap in terms of that partnership with Happy Returns and other exploratory partnerships. On the really positive side, it also changed the paradigm for FedEx and UPS and how they want to operate going forward. And so I think we'll start to see boxless, labelless as the standard. And I think FedEx and UPS and maybe even the USPS will have their own sort of standardized drop this off anywhere solution. And the role we want to play in that is sort of a neutral Switzerland. Let's give the customer and the brand the best experience, and you can drop this off wherever, and we'll make sure you've got the right QR code and the right label and all of that. And then what I'd say we've seen recently, and what's changed our roadmap there is with the return to retail, we saw I would say one obligation and one opportunity. The obligation was to tackle omni-channel returns and make it possible to, if you bought something from a brand online and they had a retail store and that customer's buying, it really maybe is only relevant in major markets like New York. But to allow the shopper to select that they want to drop off the item at a retail storefront, and to drive foot traffic for that merchant, which can enrich the brand experience and the connectivity and get them in touch with an associate and drive exchanges and all of those great things. And so that's something that has been on our roadmap and that we've got a few pilot merchants using right now. And then the opportunity that it's kind of presented is, I've sort of, already mentioned what I think is a major trend happening in the market, which is, in 2022, at the end of 2022, 85% of our returns, 85% of our 1.2 million returns that month were labels printed by the customer, and 15% were boxless, labelless QR codes. I think by the end of 2024, that will have flipped, and we'll see 85% of customers doing boxless, labelless, and the other 15% doing labels. And so what we've started to think about is, there's going to be a ton of innovation in first mile. There's going to be a ton of innovation in reverse logistics. And some of that innovation sort of meshes the two. And so think about, Shopify, if you've listened to any of their recent earnings calls, like point of sale and retail is a massively growing segment, not just in e-com merchants adopting point of sale, but in new logo and like adoption. New merchants are coming to the platform through retail. And so whether it's Shopify or Square, it doesn't matter, but the opportunity to leverage a drop-off network like you would at a FedEx office or a Staples, but have that be direct-to-consumer brands and their retail storefronts, and think of that point-of-sale network not just as retail locations, but actually as a network with network effects where we can drive returns to those storefronts as foot traffic, and then sort of like magically sort of press a button and solve the reverse logistics pain point for the merchants, who then get the benefit of that shopper driving foot traffic to their, or that return driving the shopper to their store as foot traffic, but then have the burden of like, well, I just took in, a pair of sheets, and I don't sell sheets, and this isn't my brand. How do I get that back where it goes? But I think that's, I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in both the first mile experience for shoppers in omni-channel retail and in reverse logistics over the next 12, 24 months. Heavily focused on a combination of consumer experience, shopper experience, and merchant sort of profitability and unit economics.
Yeah, one other thing that I've noticed, and I think it's more the case in Shopify than Magento, but the amount of collaborations and partnerships is considerably higher than I guess one might initially expect. Like you mentioned, your collaboration with Happy Returns, but there's a vibrant ecosystem right within the Shopify arena, and sort of Shopify is sort of the glue that keeps it all together with their APIs and their standards. But do you find that unusual as a participant in that collaboration, or is that sort of just natural to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the Shopify ecosystem since I think we were talking before the show started a little bit, like 2013, that's been part of the Shopify DNA from the very beginning. They've talked about partners in the ecosystem and the importance of that, and that has been so steadfast and so true, not just inside the walls at Shopify, but you see that sort of culture and those behaviors bleed out into the ecosystem. So it's I don't have a different experience to compare it to, so it feels very normal to me. But I do have plenty of data points of folks moving from other sort of ecosystems, so to speak, whether that's like an Adobe ecosystem or a Salesforce ecosystem, to say confidently that it's not weird to me, and that it is very unusual and perhaps unique to Shopify, and a real testament to just the commitment and the conviction with which they've fostered and nurtured and invested in us as partners, really from day one.
Cool. Well, for 2023 and beyond, other than the sort of move to boxless, labelless, anything else that sort of has you excited, or trends you expect to see happen? We could have a recession. We may not have one. And jury's out on that. But do you think there are any sort of either macroeconomic drivers or just things within the industry that you're sort of excited to sort of see where it takes us?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things, a little bit about our business and maybe a little bit about e-com generally. So one, like returns, they're not going to guess. Let me even talk about e-com. So yes, e-com came back down to earth from the pandemic spike, but that down to earth is still increasing year over year as a percentage of retail. So e-com growing is exciting. Returns aren't going anywhere. As e-com grows, and even as we've been able to get better at e-commerce returns, the 6 or 7% that you see in store still is dwarfed by the 20 to 25% of orders coming back as returns that you see in e-com. And so returns aren't going anywhere. So, we need to continue to innovate, and we will, and that's really exciting. But I do think two things will be more in the forefront than ever. One, again, going back to that Google trend of reverse logistics. One, I just have a belief that like every alternate flow will eventually become a primary flow. And the reason reverse logistics is having its moment right now, sort of abstracted to 10,000 feet, is every 3PL, third-party logistics provider, every warehouse that's ever been built was optimized to ship items out, not to receive items back. And so reverse logistics is taking the items that are coming back and optimizing that flow. And that has to happen because the volume is there now, but also because the critical nature of profitability for the merchants is there. So I think there are a couple of things that are really exciting. I often compare like direct to consumer retail and traditional retail. And I think that traditional retail's truths will become true in direct to consumer, just in different ways. And so traditional retailers have outlet stores. When you don't sell an item, when it's out of season, it goes to an outlet store. Damaged items, also aren't just dead. They go to a Gabriel Brothers or some sort of like third party discount retailer. Discount retailers and outlet stores are not a thing presently or historically for direct to consumer brands. And there's also like consignment. And so I think you're going to see a new world of like resale and re-commerce that's going to come up. The team at Arrive and the team at Trove are doing really interesting things. There are other interesting startups, even I forget the name, but there's even a returns management solution that drives a peer-to-peer economy. But I think you're going to start to see like a modern manifestation for digitally native brands in resale and re-commerce around some of those concepts. And in reverse logistics for us, what we're kind of excited about too, specifically, what is again sort of being Switzerland and enabling those parties to be really successful and help merchants deliver the right resale experiences. But we're going to go build in the 3PLs and in the warehouse management systems and with those operators to make that like dispositioning moment where a return comes back and you have to decide what to do about it, to make it really easy, really fast, and really smart to figure out, can this item just go right back on the shelf? Does it need refurbished before it can go back on the shelf? Can it not go back on the shelf? It needs to go to one of these resale channels or a marketplace or a retail store. And that has to happen quickly to meet customer expectations, market demand, all of that. And so we're very focused there. And then I think we're really going to see sustainability have a moment. I think that's evidenced in some of these resale channels coming to life. But 80% of the stuff I wear has Lycra or something in it that isn't going to degrade effectively in a landfill. And we all, unfortunately, especially in the Western world, in the U.S., are very consumer-driven economy, and products, our preferences don't match product life cycles. And so we get done with products far before the end of their useful life. And there needs to be a more sustainable way to get rid of those products. And I think it's incumbent on technology partners like us and today's modern brands and really the brands of tomorrow to figure out what sustainability really means and how to deliver on, I think, the promise of sustainable commerce that has been talked about for a long time without maybe ever really coming to fruition.
Well, that's a lot of exciting stuff to look forward to this upcoming year and in the future years. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys roll out and following your journey.
Yeah, Kevin, thank you so much. We're really excited about it too. I'll have to make sure I keep you in the loop.
Please do. Thanks so much.
Yes, sir. Cheers.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.